His symphonies are still thought of and taught as models for symphonic composition to this day. Shostakovich's music is more diverse.
It shows a great deal of depth.
It maintains its contemporary relevance.
It's often very tender, incredibly brutal. For composers, he also showed them that they could have a very large influence in political events and outcomes through their compositions. Overall, he's one of the genius artistic composers of the 20th century.
Perhaps the greatest symphonist of the 20th century.
Through the reign of Joseph Stalin, Dmitri Shostakovich led the way for Russian composers pushing through the oppression of his music and lifestyle. His modernist compositions presented intense emotions and styles which affected musicians in his era and to this day. Dmitri Shostakovich, Defying Oppression Through Music. Dmitri Shostakovich was born on September 25, 1906 in St. Petersburg, Russia, to his mother, Sofia Kokulina, and father, Dmitri Boleslavich Shostakovich. Shostakovich began playing the piano at the age of 9, taught by his mother, who was a professional piano teacher. He entered various piano competitions and won them, gaining popularity as a young adult. His piano career was just a gateway for his first hit composition, Shostakovich's Symphony No. 1. This piece was first performed in 1926 when Shostakovich was only 19. It features a plethora of unique ideas and melodies which were very contemporary at that time. This piece also reflected the aftermath of the violent Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, bringing the Romanov dynasty to an end. After Russia's first Soviet leader, Vladimir Lenin, died in 1924, Joseph Stalin became the new leader of the Communist Party. Stalin's extremely repressive regime severely impacted Shostakovich and his music for the worst. In 1937, Shostakovich released his infamous Symphony No. 5. In this same year, the Stalinist purges reached their peak, killing and relocating millions of Russian citizens. Shostakovich's Symphony No. 5 contains 4 incredible movements. Each displays Shostakovich's raw emotions. His anger is shown through full, loud, brassy tones, while his sadness is shown through soft strings. In the year 1960, Shostakovich came out with his Quartet No. 8. Its 4th movement begins with 3 pungent notes resembling the knocks at the door you would receive if you were getting taken away during the Stalinist purges. Stalin catches on to Shostakovich's expressionism, and this is where the battle begins. Stalin's image of Russia was simply an industrialized military powerhouse. Considering that he was the tyrant of Russia, he did not see eye to eye with anyone who altered his image. Shostakovich's music was being heard globally and represented Russia. He would receive threats regarding his family, ordering him to put out music that was more upbeat and joyful. Stalin felt threatened and was using his power to relieve his personal paranoia. He desired bright and peppy-sounding music which could act as a facade for the oppressed society his rule had created. Music like this was used on the radio and later on the television. Throughout his years as a composer, Shostakovich received many letters and phone calls about how his compositions should sound. With one piece, Shostakovich decided to mock the powerful and all-knowing sound that Stalin wanted. This piece is titled Folk Dances. This piece features loud, powerful brass, intricate melodies, and the tempo speeds up throughout. complexity and aggressiveness of this piece astonished the Russian audience due to the fact that they were so sheltered from the rest of the world that they had never heard anything like it. Soon thereafter, Shostakovich debuted his first opera, Lady Macbeth of Mtsensk. This opera was a huge hit and became the first music sung in space by Yuri Gagarin. In 1940, Shostakovich came out with his Symphony No. 7. After naming it Leningrad, many thought he was commemorating his previous ruler, while in fact, he was mocking. He used little to no style and didn't incorporate any complex melodies. This symphony was actually favored by his leaders, and its satirical element went right over their heads. Stalin enjoyed it so much that the following year he earned the Stalin, or USSR, State Prize for this piece. In March of 1949, Stalin forced Shostakovich to go to New York to attend the Cultural and Scientific Conference for World Peace. In exchange for his services in New York, Stalin promised to repeal his state edict banning all modernist music from being performed. On March 5, 1953, Joseph Stalin passed away from a cerebral hemorrhage. After Stalin's passing, Shostakovich had a weight lifted off of his shoulders. While most of Russia was mourning, Shostakovich was liberated. 4 years after Stalin's death, Dmitri Shostakovich released his Piano Concerto No. 2 in honor of his son Maxim's 19th birthday. In this piece, you can hear the joy being expressed, and the composer's notes explain that many family inside jokes are used throughout the piece.
From a purely musical standpoint, his compositions often stretched the capabilities of orchestral instruments.
He speaks to contemporary audiences in a way that contemporary composers still want to take notice of. And he's sort of an entry point for a lot of people whose musical tastes then go further, the same way that like people like get into classical music through like film scores, like John Williams or something. Like they'll get into that and then they branch off from there. So even if you can't necessarily point to a thing, although you sometimes can, and say that sounds like Shostakovich, it's kind of in the DNA because he is a source of inspiration early on for a lot of composers and musicians to this day.
Awesome. On August 9th, 1975, Dmitri Shostakovich passed away from a heart attack. Although he was physically gone, his lasting impact only grew. With his 15 symphonies and 15 string quartets, many rank him next to Beethoven due to his originality and creativity. He is used as a base for learning composers, and his styles and techniques are reflected in concert music all the time. His children both grew up playing piano, and his son Maxim became a conductor. His daughter Galina is a trained pianist and became a biologist, and both of his children are alive to this day. Shostakovich ended up defeating Stalin with his outstanding influence on the musical world. Although Shostakovich had to deal with the oppression of his music by the Soviet government, he rejected the Stalinist regime and became one of the most magnificent composers of the 20th century. That is how Dmitri Shostakovich defied oppression through music.